morning, this afternoon, for East and Central time, to talk about the revised RAD notice, PIH notice 2012-32 revision 2. We want to take this time just before the notice gets published, which should happen anytime this week, to talk through the contents and the major changes to the notice with just have an internal conversation about it with HUD staff. That includes, at the very least, staff in the Office of Housing Recaps office, the transaction managers and closing coordinators and others in our office, as well as staff from PIH, both at headquarters and in the field. So, and I'm sure and I hope that there are others on the line joining as well, and we thank you for your participation. And again, apologize that we're getting a little bit of a late start. This is Will Levy in the Office of Recap. I will be doing this presentation with Virginia Flores in PIH, with some color commentary from Jeff Riddell, also from PIH. I also just want everyone to be aware that on June 3rd, we will be doing an external version of this same training for all the housing authorities and all their partners. So this will be a little bit of a warm-up, but we want to, of course, make sure that all of our stakeholders have a clear understanding of the important changes that we've made. And we want to make sure that you all have as much time as possible to digest the information in advance of the kickoff calls that I know many of you are scheduling and rescheduling and getting prepared for. Okay.
And that tomorrow there'll be webinars on sections 2 and 3 of the notice as well, tomorrow afternoon.
That's right, around the same time, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so just for folks who have not used GoToMeeting before, we are happy to have this be an interactive conversation. So there's a mechanism for you to raise your hand. You can also send in questions to rad@hud.gov, and we'll be monitoring that account to field your questions. And just so we can stay on topic, feel free to ask your questions throughout the conversation, and we'll take a look at them and turn to them as appropriate. Okay, slide 3, why a revised notice? So we are first and foremost incorporating key changes authorized by the fiscal year 15 appropriations bill, which I'll talk through in a second. Incorporating a ton of lessons we've learned from the last couple of years of implementing the program, both areas of policy that we just didn't really address the first time around, and changing the way we process and manage transactions. And then the vast majority of changes in the notice are really clarifying common questions, things that we've done so far through FAQs or through other announcements of that kind, but that really ought to be codified into the RAD notice. Next slide. So many of you have seen this chart before. We've got some cool animations here that I'm very excited about. This was the prior conversion eligibility, where public housing, mod rehab, rents up wrap could convert to the conversion options for these 3 existing programs. But what we're doing in the notice, the biggest things we're doing in this notice are codifying the key changes in the FY15 appropriations bill. So first, the appropriations bill increased the cap to 185,000 units. And if you're controlling the presentation, please click once now. Second, it changed the last date we could receive applications from September 30th, 2015 to September 30th, 2018. Click again, please. It made previously mod rehab McKinney SROs, single room occupancy properties, were ineligible for RAD. And the FY15 bill made this universe of properties, which is about 400 properties, 14,000 units, eligible for conversion. Click. Fourth, we had eliminated the expiration date on second component conversions. Click. And then finally, it created a PBRA conversion option under the second component. Click. So, and then we, taking all this in, made a change ourselves, and we said that all mod rehabs would convert under the second component. Click. And the thinking here is the first component, we have a unit cap of 185,000 units. Let's preserve that all for the public housing stock. Under the second component, we have a PBRA and a PBV conversion option. There's no cap. The expiration's gone. Let's convert all the mud rehabs and rents up wraps through that option. And so that also, among other things, makes the reading of the notice a lot cleaner. So that section 2 of the notice dealing with mod rehab becomes a lot cleaner. Okay, but today's session will focus on the first component, section 1, public housing. And again, tomorrow, presenters will discuss the mod rehab, rents up, and wrap options. Okay, so first I'm going to turn to Virginia, who's just going to talk a little bit about some of the key kind of changes we've made to responsibilities and roles, which mostly isn't really discussed in the notice, but is obviously key to our immediate work.
Yeah, so we wanted to go over on slide 6 some of the highlights of how PIH staff is going to be involved moving forward in RAD. As many of you know, PIH has been taking the lead from the application, receiving the application, reviewing the applications, and issuing the CHAPs. And recap, we then kind of hand it off to recap, and they take the lead from CHAP issuance to closing. The OFO staff will be participating in the kickoff calls and the check-in calls that are going to happen about once a month. And as Will said earlier, we know that there's been some scheduling and rescheduling based on the notice publication date, but we expect OFO staff to be participating on those. The field staff should be working pretty closely with the PHAs and facilitating that relationship between the transaction managers and the PHAs. OFO staff will also be asked to review various documents for the RAD transactions and provide certain approvals and certifications, like PIC removal. We're going to talk about excess land and DOT, declaration of trust releases later, but that's the kind of stuff that we see OFO staff being involved in. Definitely work with the PHA to resolve any issues or problems that come up in the transaction. Updating the resource test, which I'm sure we'll probably have another training in the future about using the resource test, which the transaction managers have been using to keep everybody updated on the current status of the transaction, uploading any important documents. The CHAPs are kept there, the applications as well. Any updates, based on how the transaction is moving along. And we know that this is a lot of information for a lot of OFO staff, so we wanted to let everybody know that there will be network SMEs. Lindsay Reams, an OFO, has been working to develop a network of SMEs across the country that will serve as the RAD experts for all field staff. And there's been a first rollout of this roles and responsibilities document that was rolled out, I think, in December of last year. But there will be an updated one coming soon, and it will be presented on a Wednesday OFO field call. So some notes about slide 7. The implementation for the notice is generally, unless there's a specific notification otherwise, the revisions to section 1 are effective for all transactions that haven't closed yet. And there's going to be exceptions only for projects that are near closing right now. The one exception for the effective date of the notice is the eligibility and selection criteria in the notice. Applications that are received each month after this 30-day window will be prioritized based on this list of 6 items here that you see. One is redeveloping physically or functionally obsolete housing. 2 is being part of a larger comprehensive neighborhood revitalization plan. 3 is being in imminent danger of losing financing, any tax rate deadlines or any other applications using tax credits. Number 5 is if this transaction is part of a portfolio or multi-phase award, in which 50% of the properties fall under any of the above categories, and 6, all other applications. And one of the new features of the notice is that there's a prohibition on having both RAD and Section 18 approval for the same unit, so there will be instructions on when a PHA needs to make the determination between which option you're going for, either Section 18 or continuing with your RAD transaction. So that's the only section that is going to be effective 30 days after publication. Everything else is effective the date of publication. And now we'll talk about contract rents.
So before I jump into that, I forgot to make a note at the top that because this notice is not yet published, we just ask you to keep this information within HUD for now. We just want to make sure, to respect the proper processes for notice publication and creating a policy that this will be out very soon. And again, we're doing this so that you have a little bit of a head start in digesting this. But so yeah, again, please keep this internal. Feel free to send us questions. We'll take these questions on this call and afterwards, and so that you're best prepared for when the notice is published. Okay. Sorry. Sorry.
You've got a question from Sandra King.
Okay. Are you able to unmute her, or do you want to read it aloud?
Nope, Sandra, go. Sandra? Hello?
Sandra, if you're, I think you've raised your hand on the GoTo meeting. If you want to speak, if you can unmute your phone and you can ask your question. Okay, we can come back to you. I'll keep going, but others, if you have questions, feel free. So slide 9, contract rents. So again, a number of these things are policies that are already known and have been made and implemented. But so here's one of them that called the RAD rent base year. For all the original 60,000 units, or the units awarded under the original 60,000 unit cap, we calculated rents based on the 2012 appropriations. For all the new awards made over that initial 60,000 units, the rents have been recalculated based on 2014 appropriations. So a lot of times people ask, why 2014, not 2015? The basic answer to that is, while we have 2015 appropriation numbers, we don't have the final operating fund eligibility numbers. So for precision purposes, we went with the 2014 numbers. Sorry, was there a question?
Nope.
Okay. Second, here's a neat new provision in the notice is kind of building on the success and heels of the shoulders of the in energy performance contracting, the resident paid utility incentive. We have been able to implement a provision related to tenant paid utility savings, where for PBRA conversions, if energy improvements, energy and water improvements on tenant paid utilities, 75% of the savings through the utility allowance can be used to increase the contract rent. So in other words, if you've got a highly inefficient building today that has a utility allowance of $200, and the property will undergo repairs that will reduce the utility allowance to $100, we will increase the contract rent by $75, which will allow the PHA to support a greater level of rehab and support those energy improvements in the first place. So it's a really neat. This isn't how it would normally work in the Section 8 programs, which is why this is really neat. We're really excited about this. So far in conversions today, if there are savings to tenant paid utilities, HUD saves money. But we're not trying to save money in RAD. We're trying to be cost neutral. And so whatever we can do to have the most impact on improving the properties, we're excited to adopt. That's one of the new provisions you'll see. This is available to the project-based voucher program, but only by individual waiver, because it also requires that in order to do this, the property has to have a site-based utility allowance, which isn't typical in the PVV program. So the PHA would have to request a waiver both for a project-based utility allowance and then to use this incentive program. The third thing we're doing that impacts contract rents is we're clarifying that when properties are rent bundling, and that means when two properties are going to convert and we've calculated contract rents for each property, but the PHA says actually one property needs a little bit more in subsidy, and another property needs a little bit less. We make an adjustment to the initial contract rents, increasing the subsidy on one, decreasing on the other, and those are the rents that they begin with. So we're clarifying in this notice that when that happens, we want to make sure the property that's donating subsidy, that's decreasing at decreasing at lower rents, closes before or at the same time as the property that's going to increase at higher rents. So this is, again, it's how we've been implementing the program to date, but we're just codifying this for the benefit of our stakeholders, so they know up front and aren't caught off guard near the end. We've added in the notice, so this is funding instructions on slide 10, improved procedures for both the operating and capital funds and how those funds should be treated in the initial year of conversion. And a smaller clarification about how to, what to do with public housing funds that are being used in the development budget and making them available at closing. With respect to capital improvements, the existing physical condition assessment is being phased out and replaced by a capital needs assessment, which first and foremost we're simply changing the term being used, but also it's beginning the transition to the CNAE tool, which will one day be the tool I think that HUD is trying to sort of uniformly adopt across multiple programs. FHA will be adopting it soon. We expect this summer, at which point it will also apply for RAD properties. I think what we say is 6 months after the publication of the CNAE tool notice, any CNAs submitted for a financing plan must comply with the CNAE tool. We clarify some conditions in which the CNA is not required, like new construction, or where either the property has recently been built or they're taking on new construction or very substantial rehab. We make explicit that demolition is not permitted prior to conversion. Again, that's what we've been operating in that practice to date, but this is making it more explicit. And we've done extensive work to clarify the environmental review requirements. Next slide, slide 12. There is quite a bit of new language on transfer of assistance. So, we see this as a really powerful tool for public housing properties that are poorly situated today, that a PHA can move the assistance to other areas in their community. And so a lot of this language is kind of beefing up the criteria by which we would approve, because currently we haven't provided PHAs with a lot of guidance. So first of all, we're saying PHA should give us a proposed site within 90 days of CHAP award, so that we can give it a pre-approval or reject it and have them go find another site. The notice will prohibit transfers to neighborhoods of concentrated poverty. We're trying to be somewhat nimble here, especially given a lot of the research about opportunity neighborhoods, so that we can encourage and require transfers of assistance go to strong neighborhoods. We define when assistance can be transferred to an existing tax credit project, which is i.e. when it's to deconcentrate poverty or de-densify projects with extensive capital needs. Related, we describe under what conditions in which HUD will release the DOT at the current site when at the closing. When a property, housing property is, the PHA proposes to transfer the assistance away, what happens to the existing property? And so there's essentially three scenarios. One is the PHA can sell the property at fair market value and use those proceeds to support RAD conversion in the development budgets and acquisition and in whatever way is needed to support another RAD deal. The second is the land can be sold at below fair market value within a year, so that it can be used for other affordable housing, and that affordable housing is not just restricted to Section 8 or Section 9 purposes. It could be other tax credit housing, for example. Or it can be sold within a year at fair market value, and the proceeds, rather than land itself, the proceeds of the sale could be used for other affordable housing. Any cases that don't fit in these three categories, the land would be subject to normal public housing removal procedures, Section 18, most typically. But what we wanted to do here is give PHAs a clear rule book of what they can do with that land and property following a transfer of assistance, so that it could have the most impact in their affordable housing development. Next slide, fair housing, civil rights. Turn back to Virginia.
Yeah, so this has also been a part of the notice that we're putting in more language about, additional guidance about what kind of things we want PHAs to be thinking about when developing their transaction. And as many of you know, we've had an FHEO checklist that, PHAs have had to fill out, which we're going to be doing some revisions to. But we're also establishing an upfront civil rights review for any of the coming transactions. And we're especially going to be flagging certain transactions which we've seen, increased concerns about the ones that we've already processed. So the ones that we're going to be flagging for these additional reviews are going to be those that involve new construction in an area of minority concentration, where there's a transfer of assistance, where there's any reduction of assisted units, where there's a change in the unit configuration. Let's say if you're changing the bedroom sizes from 3 bedrooms to 2 bedrooms, and where there's any changes in occupancy. For example, if there's a change, if it's a senior building, and if it's a designated senior building under public housing rules, but you're changing some of them to be occupied by families. So if any of those things, and if they're going to affect, normally if we think it's going to affect the residents or affect the status of their residency, these are some of the things that are going to raise these flags and have an additional civil rights review. Now we'll talk about ownership and control.
Okay, so one of the areas in which we've gotten a number of questions over the last year is, especially in the case of tax credits, what ownership and control provisions satisfy the statutory requirements. So the statute says post-conversion, the property must be public or nonprofit, owned or controlled. Sorry, next slide for those controlling. Thank you. But has an exception, says in the case of tax credits, where technically the owner is not a public or nonprofit, the PHA has to retain sufficient interest in the property. And so the notice goes into greater detail and clarifies what satisfies sufficient interest. And so these are very common tools that are used in public housing mixed finance, like long-term ground leases. And so we came up with a variety of categories that would meet our criteria. And notably, some things that were taken out were secondary financing and a reversion clause, a right to purchase clause, that we didn't feel like those satisfied sufficient interest. So, and of course, we also have an out where in case somebody proposes something else to us that we think is actually a good idea. There's other means that HUD finds acceptable. Okay, next slide, resident provisions. So we did just a few things on this front. The first thing, which is the case we just kind of repeatedly come across, but it's always a relatively rare. Oh, sorry, not rare. It happens in most properties, but it's always just a handful of residents where, because we have RAD rents that are well below market usually, you have families who pay when paying 30% of their income, it actually exceeds the RAD contract rent. And the PBV program in particular, reverting to PBV rules, doesn't ensure that the resident remains assisted and retains the protections as a federally assisted family. And so what we're clarifying in the notice is that the existing family can stay in the property, charge 30% of their income, retains all rights that come with being a PBV household, including those included in the lease and choice mobility. For PBRA, we essentially adopt the same same approach, but it also applies to new admissions to the program in the future. The second thing is clarified protections for overhoused families. So it was kind of inadvertently left out originally in the notice. We're to make sure that people that are residents that are overhoused in their existing unit can remain, do not have to be kicked out. They can remain and as soon as a right-sized unit is available, that they can be moved into those units. But until such time, they're permitted to remain in their overhoused unit. And finally, as the Jobs Plus program is being developed and growing, there's a provision that allows Jobs Plus grantees to continue participation, even though the property will no longer be a public housing property. And that's just background. It's one of those areas where we're just kind of testing out, where we recognize that there are going to be some unique interactions between RAD and Jobs Plus, and so we're kind of proceeding cautiously to make sure that the goals of both programs can be achieved.
Yeah, and it's similar to the grandfathering of FSS that we did in the original version of the notice. This is a departmental initiative goal, and we want to see how it works. Continue seeing it benefit these residents. So.
Okay, but by the way, for folks who may not have noticed, the organization of this deck more or less mimics the organization of the notice itself. So if we appear to be jumping around from topic to topic in no rational manner, that's not a reflection of our ability to put a presentation together, but of our ability to put a notice together. So the next couple of slides are on just specific changes to PBRA and PBV. And so for PBRA, we are specifying that 2530 clearance, which for those who are not familiar, it's a clearance that happens for all new owners of PBRA properties to make sure they're not bad actors. And the affirmative fair housing marketing plan must be submitted with the financing plan. Sometimes, right now, they sometimes don't get completed till after conversion, so we just want to button that up. We also clarified that a future changes clause that in the MARA contract, which RAD is for PBRA conversions, it attempts to mimic as much as possible the contracts that most multifamily properties are under, which is under the MARA Act. That we're conforming our contract to a provision in there that discusses, well, what if Congress makes future changes to the rents? What are my rights as an owner? For project-based vouchers, the largest change is a modification to the choice mobility requirement. So right now, Right now, in a project-based voucher, resident of a project-based voucher unit has a right to, after living in the unit for a year, raise their hand and say, I'd like a voucher, a tenant-based voucher, and the PHA has to give them a voucher if they have one available, without regard to any other local priorities it is established in its Section 8 administrative plan. And so some PHAs have said, look, I understood that by going into RAD, it was going to put pressure on my turnover vouchers. What I didn't realize is that I would completely lose any discretion to serve certain populations that I think are really best, we locally have determined are best served with tenant-based assistance, such as victims of domestic violence or other local priorities. And so we are allowing a PHA to, if they wanted, for obviously, if they go to project-based rental assistance, it's outside of their MTW program. There's no ongoing flexibility that they have with respect to waiving statute or regs. But if they convert to project-based vouchers, they do. However, there are certain things that are required by RAD, by statute, or administratively that we don't want MTWs to continue to have flexibility around. The key thing of those is choice mobility. So when agencies have come to us and said, okay, we recognize it's an important goal of the program to give families resident choice or the option to move, we want to modify the program and allow them to move after 3 years of living in a property or other modifications like that. And we've said no. We're sticking to the to a single policy on choice mobility. Now there are other things that MTWs can do that we at RAD does not have any issue with, any policy conflict with, like alternative tenant rent calculations or different waiting list practices, just as 2 examples. So we go into greater detail in the notice, kind of divvying up what belongs in which category. The second thing is require all MTW agencies to amend their Attachment A of their MTW agreement. That's their funding attachment. There are a couple of provisions in their Attachment A that, without modification, would result in not cost neutrality if they converted those properties. Just so you know, that we're making sure that we're going to try to make sure that the MTW coordinators are on the kickoff calls and are giving those agencies their the amended Attachment A, which we draft as early as possible, because we want those done by financing plan. And then lastly, it clarifies that for the alternative subsidy MTWs, there's 9 or 10 of them out there still, that where they're funded not according to Part 990, the standard operating fund rule, but through an alternative means that for any application submitted after March 5th or after today, that their rents will be recalculated based on the operating fund rule. So for any applications, including portfolio and multi-phase awards that were submitted before March 5th, 2015, their rents were established one way based on what they're actually receiving through their alternative subsidy agreements. But any applications received since then, we will recalculate their rents. And so those agencies can come to us and request what those rents would be. Okay, back to Virginia.
So on the next slide, we talk about changes to the timing of the transaction processing. Can we move to the next slide? To slide 19.
We're there.
Oh, there we go. Thanks. Some of the bigger changes is that we extend multi-phase applications through July 1st, 2018. But for staff, the biggest change they'll see is the elimination of most of the pre-financing plan milestones. The biggest ones, right, are going to be that you submit your application and you receive a CHAP. But then after that, there's going to be, you're basically going to be moving from CHAP to financing plan is going to be your next major milestone. But there's going to be these new check-in calls that the TMs do with the PHAs and that OFO staff are participating on. And for this next batch of applications, the milestones will begin the latter date of the issuance of the CHAP or 30 days following publication of the notice. And for new awards, we'll be establishing financing plan due dates for various transaction types, depending on whether you've got like one transaction, multiple transactions, what kind of financing you're using. All of those things are going to go into determining when your financing plan due date is. So your TMs and field office staff will be working closely with the PHAs to let them know what those dates are. The notice also clarifies the process for reviewing complete financing plan submissions, which means that we expect the financing plans to be actually completed when they come to us, which, you know, a lot of times we get stuck with missing information, and there's a lot of back and forth with the PHA. And we're also, when we actually receive the completed financing plan, there's timelines for HUD review and turnaround, which has been an issue as well in the past. So the next slide, we have on there. There's been a few changes to the financing requirements. The notice clarifies acceptable loan terms and also clarifies how PHAs can use excess loan proceeds. Will, do you have an example of those? So
they're very straightforward. That essentially excess loan proceeds are unrestricted, just like any other Section 8 owner could take out excess loan proceeds and use. So if a PHA does this as part of a RAD transaction, it's fine, of course, as long as they're not also putting capital funds into the deal, is the main exception, or other public housing program funds.
And just on the next slide, a few notes on closing. The notice also provides additional information on when non-dwelling property and land can be released from the public housing program in conjunction with a RAD transaction. There's been a lot of questions about this, and for PIH, this is a place where we get our field staff involved quite a bit. So the general guidance will be that land and property that is, needed for to support the RAD conversion can be conveyed, but all other excess land or units, not units, but excess land or buildings must be processed through normal public housing release authorities like Section 18, the demo dispo process that the Special Application Center handles. So the PHA will need to be submitting information that the field office and the transaction managers will review and determine whether or not the PHA needs to go through the Section 18 demo dispo process, or whether or not the land or the buildings are not excess and can be conveyed through the RAD transaction. As I said earlier, the PIH field office will be intimately involved with this approval and review process, as they have the best knowledge of the PHA's property and lands, most familiar with the site itself, and will help us make that determination whether or not this should be released in conjunction with the RAD transaction. And we'll talk about exiting public housing.
So yeah, this is the last one, and then we'll go to your questions. There are three things we've put in this category. So first is clarifying that while you're under CHAP and not yet closed, while the property is exempt from FOS scoring, the REACT still performs its assessments. It doesn't issue a score, but it does the assessment. So we get this all the time where a PHA says, why did an inspector give me a call to set up an appointment? I have a CHAP, I'm going to close in 8 months. Well, we don't know that you're going to close in 8 months. And it's our responsibility to make sure that the housing is still decent, safe, and sanitary. So the inspections will still occur. So it's just one clarification. There are a couple of revisions made to comport with the new PIC removal procedures that we're also rolling out now for those who've been on the call last week, and there's another training in a week and a half or so on the new PIC removal procedures. There's really two key things that the PHA has to do. One is submit their PIC removal application within 30 days of CHAP, and that's in the notice, and the other is at closing, submit their 50058 end of participation so that we can then remove the units. Those are the only two things the PHA needs to do. The rest of the removal processes are really within HUD. So we are codifying and enforcing it via the notice. And the last thing related to exiting public housing is for those properties with energy performance contracts, we've added some instructions on what the PHA needs to do to understand whatever HUD requirements there are for removing a property that's covered under the EPC from public housing, which is essentially getting an amendment letter from the Energy Office that estimates how much of the outstanding debt is attributable to the property that's leaving the program. I think that's it. We will now go to the final slide, which is just a reminder on how to ask questions. So for those who want to, and we strongly encourage this, raise their hand and ask your question before all of us. That's preferable because otherwise we kind of a hard time reading some of the small print sometimes. So please raise your hand or submit your questions, and we'll try to be helpful.
So, Will, I've got one typed question for you, and no hands raised at this point. But the question that we do have is, under the new timelines, when will the relocation plan come into play? Should we still get this up front, or will this be submitted as part of the financing plan?
So there's not currently a requirement that a relocation plan be submitted. We still have a requirement that the what we call the accessibility and relocation checklist be submitted with the financing plan, but there's still no requirement that a relocation plan be submitted. Now we will.
And one of the new requirements that we've instituted since the last notice has been the TM relocation checklist, which needs to be submitted with the financing plan as well, and it's part of the final review that we do before a transaction goes to closing. But mainly that's only going to be the review that the TM has to do for that only gets triggered if there's going to be relocation that's longer than a year. So if your transaction doesn't have any relocation that's longer than a year, you're going to check a few boxes at the beginning of the checklist, and then you're not going to have to complete the rest. But one of the questions there is asking whether or not the PHA has completed a relocation plan for themselves. But again, as Will said, it's not something that HUD collects, not something that we require, and not something that the PHA has to submit to HUD for review unless there's larger concerns that we flag.
And just for my clarification, Virginia, the TM relocation checklist is something that the PHA is not filling out. The TM is filling out.
PHA is not filling out. And I'd like, since this is a HUD internal call, well, you know, there's a RAD relocation checklist that's for the public housing, Section 1, Component 1 of the notice. And we're going to be doing reviews to that as well. That's going to include more guidance and clarify some of the things that weren't clear in the first round of the relocation notice. And our ultimate goal is to have the RAD TM checklist, the checklist that the TMs currently fill out on relocation, include all of the elements that are currently included in the FHEO accessibility and relocation checklist so that it becomes a tool for the PHA and their planning, where they can think about accessibility, fair housing, civil rights, relocation, and it'll be something that goes through PRA and is a public document, and we hope that the PHAs will use this as their kind of planning tool on this, you know, arena of concerns.
Great, thanks, Virginia.
Yeah, so we've got Harry's trying to ask a question, but Harry, you've got to put in your audio pin to be able to unmute you. So if you could do that, that'd be great. We do also have a typed question for you, Will. Are RAD units subjected to 20% PVV cap?
No, and that's not a change, but since the beginnings of RAD, new PBV units as a result that come as a result of RAD are not included in the 20% cap. One thing we are clarifying in the notice is that when you're calculating that 20% cap, the RAD units don't go in either the numerator nor the denominator. So you essentially take them out of the equation and look at the PHA's voucher inventory aside from RAD, and that's both for first and second component conversions. But thank you for pointing out that is actually one of the things we're clarifying in the notice. But the policy about not including them has been there from the start.
All right, let's see if I got another one for you.
And Robert, we prioritize those who raise their hands and want to join the conversation over those who
exactly.
questions.
That's right. So the question that's just come up is another type question. Is there a perceived concern of FHEO's required participation as many FHEO offices are understaffed and not providing timely responses to PHA plan reviews?
So this is definitely, I think the resource question, I think, is a question that we see across all offices: housing, FHEO, PIH, CPD, which is involved a lot on the relocation front. So the resource question is one that all of the offices are considering, and I think it's one of the reasons why we're trying to take this approach of reviewing things based on risk levels and based on which red flags are raised, right? and only in transactions that are more complex and have, more like things like transfer of assistance, or you're changing these occupancy types, like those are the kinds of transactions that we're going to be spending more time reviewing different elements for, because of this resource question, that there's not enough staff to do the full level of review that some would like to have, and trying to do the best that we can based on both risk of a transaction and resources.
And FHEO is just as reasonable as the rest of us. One of the things they pointed out in this process is that the PHA plan is not the best place for them to perform these reviews because it's a little too late in the process, or sometimes too early before the plan, the conversion is fully baked. And so, trying to respond to that, we've pulled out a lot of this analysis. And the review that they'll be doing is separate and apart from their review of the PHA plans.
All right, Will, so we've got a question from Harry. He says, please clarify how this affects the population of deals under the 60,000. So the first round, how does this new notice impact the first round of RAD transactions?
Right, so everything applies to any properties that haven't yet closed. The one primary exception is that for everyone who has CHAPS, they will not have new financing plan due dates that are kicked out in 6 months. They're going to retain the current dates that we've set for them for when we expect to see their financing plan. But otherwise, all of these provisions apply to everyone. And as Virginia noted, we've given ourselves room to be reasonable. That if somebody is at the closing table, we're not going to kick them out because they didn't fulfill a requirement that we're just about to institute. Right, it's pretty straightforward. Everything applies to everyone, unless you've already closed and you're not with us anymore.
All right, another one for you. Under MTW, if the PHA wants to use funds available under the MTW agreement to augment their RAD rents, what is the procedure?
So what we've typically seen is the MTW makes this request to the transaction manager. The transaction manager coordinates with the transaction manager makes sure that, first of all, that they're not that by increasing the rents in that way, it's needed in the transaction, that it passes a subsidy layering review, that whatever level they're planning to increase the rents to is within the bounds of the program or any alternative rent caps the MTW has created, and is coordinating with the MTW coordinator here at headquarters to make sure of those things. So essentially, the transaction manager is making sure that those rents are approvable on those criteria, that it's needed in the transaction and allowable under their MTW agreement.
And another MTW question for you. Did you indicate that the MTW coordinators will be on the kickoff calls and then on the ongoing calls as well?
I don't know if it's been decided whether they're going to be on the ongoing calls. Certainly, we think it's valuable for them to be on the kickoff calls just to convey some of the basics, like the revision to the attachment A, and to point them to a few things. But I don't know.
Yeah, I think in practice it would make sense. We haven't stated that, but I would think that the MTW staff would be involved just as much as the other PIH field staff would be involved. So for a TM coordinating these calls, like I would always include the MTW point of contact. in scheduling any of the calls.
Always, they're definitely very important people to, at the very least, keep in the loop on this.
So Harry's come back and asked on the a follow-up question to your response about whether the notice applies to the below 60, and he says that should you use the effective not yet closed or the RCC issue date for when you can reset the milestones?
I don't know if I'm following the question.
All right. Well, we'll see if he sends a clarifier in for that.
Sorry, Harry.
Another question is, what is the effect of bundling rents on the tenant rent portion?
It doesn't impact what the tenants are paying. Tenants are still paying 30% of their income. It's really just a matter of post-conversion, one property getting more HAP subsidy and one property getting less HAP subsidy. So it doesn't have any impact on the
tenant portion of
the rent.
Cool. So I have no raised hands, and I have no other questions at the moment.
Unbelievable. I'm glad we could be crystal clear on everything else.
So yeah, there's always room for more questions, submitting them to rad@hud.gov, and also on the PIH side, getting in touch with the network SMEs for any questions that may be ongoing in the rollout of the notice or any other topical questions on roles and responsibilities for us.
And with that, one more check on any more questions?
No more questions.
Okay. So thank you all for your time. Sorry again that we were late, but I think we were able to accelerate this training so that we made up for lost time. We look forward to continuing to work together on this.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.